Hi, I don't know how to break this to you, but your studio or room is lying to you. The purpose of this video is to raise awareness to the problem and to help you measure it and then solve it. Let me try and prove it to you with a simple test. If you have an iPhone, open up the Voice Memos app and start a new recording. And if you shut your screen off and tap it, you'll get a pretty big display. Now I'll just pause this for a second. Now, I'm going to assume you're in your studio and listening with monitors. If not, look at what's about to happen here, and you can always replay this video and try this later. I'm going to play a series of notes, all at the same exact level, bass notes we all love to play in here, and if your room isn't lying to you, then the peak level of every note I play as it registers on your phone should be the same level. The bottom row is my recording, top row is what my room does to it. So check out the difference in level between these two notes or these two notes. They're only a semitone apart, both on my phone and obviously in my DAW. Another thing worth noticing is how the attack and decay portions of the sound in my room are quite different from what is recorded as the sound gradually builds up and then dies down. This happens because depending on the size of your room, different notes will resonate and be amplified by the room. These are also called room modes. And on the other hand, other frequencies may be reduced or canceled out. This means that if I record my music and listen to it later somewhere else or share it with somebody else, they're going to hear something completely different in their room or on their headphones compared to what I'm hearing here. A more professional and precise way to test a room is with software designed for these measurements and with measurement microphones that are specifically also designed for this purpose. These microphones cost anywhere between $70 to $100, and they should come with a calibration file you can download with the frequency response of the particular microphone using the specific ID or serial number of the mic. Some mics like this one require phantom power from your audio interface. Others can be powered by USB directly from your computer. Now there's free software for room measurement called Room EQ Wizard or REW, which is extremely powerful and customizable. We'll get to this in a bit, but if you have a Mac, I like the free demo version of Fuzz Measure, which only lets you take 2 measurements, but it's quite easy to use. It'll help you adjust levels and tell you if you're in the right ballpark, and then you just hit plus and measure your room. Now remember, my computer is sending out a completely flat signal, so this should be in a perfect world, which obviously we don't live in, perfectly flat, but you can see the difference between the highest high and the lowest low is almost, or actually about 30 dB, which is quite a lot, and the impulse response of this room is also not too great, almost over 100 and almost 200 milliseconds. Now you could say the problem was with my speaker, that the speaker output isn't flat. Now to really test this, we'd need an anechoic chamber, but here's a little fun thing you can try at home. So I took my setup out to the backyard. Not quite an anechoic chamber, but still worth a check. And after a few seconds, this is the result. Let's take a closer look again. This is inside my room. Now compare this to my not quite anechoic backyard. These are the atoms. They're rated at 38 Hertz. They're supposed to start responding at 38 Hertz. And we're getting plus minus 2 dB across the range, well into 20 kilohertz. And the impulse response is under 20 milliseconds, which is quite good. If you want to book mixing sessions in my backyard, give me a call. Okay, so let's see what we can do to flatten the curve other than moving the whole studio to the backyard. So the first step to getting your music to sound right in your room is proper positioning both of your speakers and of yourself. Imagine that this is your room for the sake of this example. Let's just assume these are my speakers. This is where they point. So step 1 is pointing your speakers lengthwise, and they need to form an equilateral triangle with you. You should be obviously pointing facing your speakers, and you need to be about 38% the way in, looking at the narrow wall of your room. And the reason for this 38% number is that you need to be between 50% and 25%. So let's assume for a second that this is the 50% spot and this is the 25% spot. 38% is right smack between 25 and 50%. Let's just assume that this is it, and that this is an equilateral triangle. The reason this spot is important is because standing waves will typically peak halfway through the room and then be at their lowest point at 25%. So hopefully over here is where you'll hear them in the most balanced way. The next logical step to fix the problems in a room is to treat it, and I don't mean giving it treats to get it to tell the truth, but rather to put up acoustic panels at the first reflection points, which I'll point to videos in the description that explain exactly how to do that, but it's more or less here. Now, these typically handle the higher frequencies. Bass traps take care of the lower frequencies. The problem is, for most rooms, you'd need huge bass traps, and this is just an analogy, obviously, put around the room to properly handle the room modes. Again, I'll refer you to videos about acoustic treatment in the comment section below, and obviously smaller bass traps would also help, but to handle those big bad bass modes in the bottom that you see over here, you need some pretty big bass traps. Acoustic treatment, even if not perfect, certainly helps. The reality is, however, that most people don't get their rooms treated. They don't sit in the same place all the time. It's expensive, and if you don't do it right, you might be wasting your money and making your room uglier. So let's look at other alternatives or things that you can add to room treatment. Because I know my room isn't properly treated, when mixing or mastering a song and even making one of my videos, I always use headphones. Obviously, if you can have both, that's great, but if you have to pick one, I think investing in good headphones as opposed to treating your room is the better choice. And if you think quality headphones cost you a lot, wait till you hear what properly treating a room will cost you. Good, really affordable headphones I use are the Beyerdynamics, and if you've got the budget, these Neumanns are pretty amazing too. And regardless, of course, later on it's always best to check your music on regular headphones in your car and so on, because realistically that's what many people will be listening to it on. Anyway, beyond treatment and headphones, I highly recommend you try room EQ and correction software. You should know that some people are religiously against it, and to some speaker manufacturers it's blasphemy. They invest so much in making their speakers perfectly flat, and then someone goes out and messes with the signal they're fed. But as I'll show you in a bit, I think it can help a lot, especially with these big bumps in the lower frequency ranges. Let's first look at a free solution, and then we'll look at a few paid options. Now, if this is free, why even look at paid tools? Because this is a very comprehensive and pretty complex tool. I won't even pretend to say that I mastered it. You start out by loading your microphone calibration file into here, into the mic/meter tab. Your mic's serial number is what you use to go to the manufacturer's site and download that, upload it into here. Again, there's a lot to go through here, which I won't talk about. Mainly you choose your audio interface and the inputs and the outputs. Always start at low levels so you don't blow out your speakers. Then you go ahead into measure and you can start measuring. So this is a single sweep of this location, this particular location in my room. And the goal of this software in simple terms is to apply parametric EQ opposite to the bumps you see here across the spectrum. Now, the biggest problem with room EQ correction is that different frequencies are accentuated differently in various parts of your room. So ideally, you'd take a measurement of where your head is at and you'd move the microphone around that location and take a few more measurements. Let's, just for the sake of the example, do a couple more at slightly different locations. If we lay them on top of each other, these are the measurements with a spread. We can remove the spread. And you can see they're pretty similar at the lower frequencies, but kind of get garbled up here up top. And that's just with this little change, between these locations. If I move the location farther out, maybe to here, and take another measurement, you can see it gets a whole lot messier, and yet still pretty consistent on the lower frequencies. This, I think, is one of the reasons why for room EQ correction, it's better to focus on the lower frequencies and just not apply EQ to the higher ones because things can get pretty different with pretty minute differences in location. Now again, this is a complex process. You need to take proper measurements in different locations and you need to measure the left and right speakers separately. Let's just go through this quickly to show how you proceed from here. You can average the responses if you like into one curve, which is now this guy here. Then I can delete these measurements, won't be needing them anymore. And now the magic behind REW or Room EQ Wizard is that it can turn this into EQs or an impulse response that you can apply inside your DAW. So you do that over here in the EQ window or page. Now again, I won't go over everything here. These are various devices that you can generate EQs for. This is where you can design your target curve. That's this guy here. And you can automatically also set the target level. You want to pick full range if you're working with speakers like these, or if you've got a subwoofer, you can adjust for that as well. Let's stick with full range. This is sort of like a house curve shape, which is a bit higher here and gradually goes down lower above 1000 Hertz. I won't mess with this because I'm only going to correct from 750 Hertz and below. This is a good setting for the target level because generally you want to attenuate these bumps and not set a higher target and amplify. EQ should be cutting your frequencies and not increasing them. And then if you hit match response to target, Room EQ Wizard will start doing its magic. And what it did here is basically generate 11 EQs, which will cause our room to hopefully be as flat as possible. If I remove these for a second and press predicted, you can see what the predicted curve will be like after applying these EQs. Remember, we're not touching anything above 750 Hertz. Let's go back and take a look at the filters. Now, once you have these, you can take a look at the actual parameters and apply this to your EQ or export a file if you have one of these devices that this is compatible with. But a simpler route is to just go ahead into here and export filters impulse response as a WAV file. Now, you could do this in stereo or in mono for each of the channels. You need to match the sample rate to that of your project, ideally. Then just hit OK and save the WAV file so that you can later on load up the impulse response into a convolution reverb, which in this case acts like a filter. So like I mentioned earlier, using Room EQ Wizard is a process with a lot of parameters and a lot of moving parts, taking multiple measurements, averaging them out, taking different measurements for the left and right speaker, exporting at the right bit rate for the filter impulse response. If you make a mistake along the way, you've basically defeated the whole purpose of the process. And that's why there are companies out there that have come up with software to hopefully make this process much simpler and maybe even throw in more advanced technology here and there. I've tested two such solutions, Reference 4 by SonarWorks and Arc 3 from IK Multimedia. Setting up the software is a very similar process. After a quick mic and level calibration, you'll be asked to measure multiple points in your room, close to 40 locations with SonarWorks and 21 locations with Arc 3. The end result in both cases is a plugin that you can use inside your DAW, and SonarWorks has the added benefit of software they call system-wide, which runs in the background on your computer and lets you apply correction to everything you play on it, whether it's YouTube videos, Spotify, and so on, not just the project in your DAW. Now, luckily, both have free trial versions, so I highly recommend you try them out. Now, the way to test if they work in your room is obviously listen to them before and after, but I'll show you a nice little trick where you can test them a little bit more scientifically. So to test whether these work like they're supposed to, I'm going to trick Room EQ Wizard to thinking it's sending its audio out to the speakers, but actually I'm going to loop back the audio from one of the speaker outputs into one of the inputs on my audio interface. And I'll take this microphone and move it out of this location and to where I usually listen to music, and it's off camera, so bear with me for a second. So this channel is a simple pass-through of audio from EQ Wizard out to my speakers, then into the microphone and back into here. This is the channel with the convolution reverb plugin, and this is the impulse response that I measured of that location over there. I averaged out about 4 different positions in that location. Then this channel is Arc 3. Let's take a look at it for a second so you can see it also identified the modes in my room. and it's proposing a solution, which we'll listen to in a second. And then SonarWorks is over here. This is their plugin. This is their correction. Note that it's also in stereo, just like ARC. Let's just quickly take a look at the before. You should be familiar with the mess that's going on in my room by now, right? This massive spike here, and these guys. Now, each of these has a few options. Zero latency is works faster, but potentially introduces phase shift. I'll go with linear phase, which also may have disadvantages, but is supposed to be the best, I think. So let's start with the audio pass-through. I'll enable that. Then go into Room EQ Wizard, start a blank slate, measure. So let's call this pass-through. Let's do it again for the convolution plugin. This is an export from Room EQ Wizard. Let's measure this. Now this is quite a lot to look at. Luckily, we can apply psychoacoustic smoothing to these to make them a little bit more appealing visually. Let's keep going. Moving on to Arc 3. Again, smooth it out. And then finally, let's take a look at SonarWorks. And again, smoothen this out. So who's the winner? You tell me. Let's look at these one by one. Maybe start first with the pass-through, and I'm going to remove a bit of the noise here. Let's take a look at. So on the pass-through, we're looking at 112 on top to, let's stop here, let's say 95. So about 17 dB top to bottom. Let's look at the convolution. 113 to 101. 12 dB difference. We've got these peaks here. And obviously I could have used it wrong, right? Like I said, I'm not an REW pro. Let's take a look at Arc 3, around 99 to 93. So 6 dB difference across most of the range, which isn't too shabby. And SonarWorks 104 to 94, about 10 dB top to bottom. Now, just for curiosity's sake, I wonder what happens if we go into SonarWorks and choose the zero latency version. Let's run a test there. Apply smoothing. This goes from 102 to 94.6, so 8 or 7 dB. So definitely play around with the parameters because you might get better results. And always test. So very interesting test. I think if you test these at home, please let me know in the comments section how it works out for you. One final thing before I go to summarize, always put the convolution plugin or Arc 3 or SonarWorks on your master, and don't forget to remove it before you export your project. Otherwise, you'll bake the correction into your project, which is literally the opposite of what we're trying to achieve. Okay, so let's summarize and look at a few conclusions. Number one, your room is probably lying to you big time. You need to be aware of that if you plan to record and share your music or even listen to it somewhere else. Not only is it lying to you, but it's coming up with different stories based on where you are in the room. The good news is that if you measure different locations and different speaker placements, some areas in your room are better than others. Quick tip, avoid sitting in the corners. Bass loves to accumulate there, which is why that's where the bass traps go. Number 3, if you don't want to mess with all this treatment and correction business, mix with headphones or mix in your backyard. Just make sure your neighbors like your music. Number 4, room correction software works, but you have to calibrate it per location you listen to in your room. Unless you trust yourself to learn Room EQ Wizard, I would recommend trying out either Arc 3 or SonarWorks. Both have trial versions and work in stereo. Just remember to remeasure for each location you plan to sit in your room, or if you move your stuff around, you need to remeasure as well. Number 5, if your speaker has bass attenuation, that might not solve the problem in the way you'd want. If you lower the entire bass, you'll be lowering these notes as well, not just the high ones. So even if you're just going to parametric EQ your way out of these 2 bumps or whatever bumps exist in your room, you'll go a long way towards fixing the problems in it. Moving on, always attenuate Don't try to boost the lower ones, that might impact your headroom. And some frequencies can't be increased because of the way your room resonates. Next up, focus your room correction on the lower frequencies, certainly below 1000 Hertz. Remember what we saw before. Moving your ear a little bit to the left and right, or the microphone, dramatically changes the frequency situation. Higher frequencies are better dealt with treatment, and they require less material than fixing the lower frequencies. Next, I've watched a lot of room treatment tutorials, and I'll link to some of them below. I still don't feel comfortable doing my own treatment. Consider hiring a professional acoustician recommended by someone you trust, rather than just buying panels and bass traps. Like other areas, flattening a curve is better done based on science and measurement rather than brute force. Final tip, read the comment section. Hopefully people who know way more about this than me will leave additional good ideas below. And bonus tip, I'll be putting everything I know and learn in the future about this topic in my constantly updated book of electronic music ideas, tips, and tricks, available to the people who support this channel on Patreon. Hit like if this helped you flatten your curve, and make sure to ring the bell after subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.